All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to Diabetes Talk. I'm your host, Charlie O'Connell. We are broadcasting live and direct from New Haven, Connecticut, here in the GlucoseZone. And tonight's topic is diabetes and celiac disease. Guys, this is a subject and something that comes up more and more with people living with diabetes. There seems to be a correlation between diabetes and celiac disease. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation about gluten. And our goal tonight, guys, is to really clarify that for you. Our team has done an amazing job of putting together a ton of relevant information. And I want to encourage you, after you watch this talk, to go to our blog site with this title, okay, to actually really get in written format exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. We are live all over the world. Let's get right into it, guys. So the first thing is, what is celiac disease? That is a very important question. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, very similar to type 1 diabetes. And people who have type 1 diabetes and people that suffer from autoimmune diseases in general apparently and seem to be more susceptible to celiac disease, okay? The actual disease itself is a digestive condition triggered by the consumption of the protein gluten, okay? So that is what celiac disease is, okay? It is triggered by the consumption of the protein gluten. And when people with celiac disease consume foods containing gluten, they experience an immune reaction, okay? And that immune reaction is experienced in their small intestines. And what actually happens is damage is caused to the inner surface of the small intestine, and an inability to absorb certain nutrients occurs, which affects growth in children and nutritional status in both children and adults. That is what actually celiac disease is. So the key points here, guys, is it's an autoimmune disease. It is triggered, okay? It's a digestive condition that's triggered by the consumption of protein. And what actually happens is an immune reaction to the consumption of the protein gluten in the small intestines that ultimately damages the inner surface of the small intestines and causes an inability to absorb certain nutrients. All right? Now, the symptoms of celiac disease, when you eat foods, if you have celiac disease and you eat foods that contain the protein gluten, you can experience things like stomach pain, bloating, diarrhea, joint pain, muscle cramps, skin rash, mouth sores, okay, tingling in the legs and feet, and flu-like symptoms or malaise. And there is no known treatment or cure for celiac disease except for avoiding the consumption of gluten. So this is what's interesting about this topic, guys, in general, is people living with diabetes, to start with, have special food requirements and needs and really have to be careful with the food they eat. And I want to challenge especially our type 1 community. Sometimes people with type 1 diabetes almost take offense when you suggest that as a person living with type 1 diabetes, you have to be careful with the foods that you eat. And the common kind of response to that is, well, I can eat any food that I want. You know what? Technically, yes, that is true. You can eat any food that you want. But the reality is, guys, if you have type 1 diabetes, your body cannot process carbohydrates, okay? And the reality is, if you have type 2 diabetes, your body has trouble processing carbohydrates. So if we are being real with ourselves, okay, whether you have type 1 diabetes or if you have type 2 diabetes, you do definitely have special nutritional requirements. And it's much better and more important to acknowledge that, so that then we can find the foods that we like, that we enjoy, okay, and really are much healthier options for us. Now, having said that, there are plenty of carbohydrates and other sources of protein that you can consume that are gluten-free, all right? But let's start off with what are the actual foods that contain gluten. And here is the big, most important, relevant one, is wheat, okay? So the protein gluten is in wheat, and wheat in general takes many different forms. So I'm going to give you an actual list of the different forms that wheat takes. Wheat is included in wheat berries, durum, emmer, semolina, spelt, farina, farro, gram, kamut, okay, which is Eurasian wheat, and einkorn wheat. It is also in rye and barley and triticale, okay? Now, there is a book, guys, called Wheat Belly, and I want you to just Google it. Just Google Wheat Belly, and you will be exposed to a really, really challenging fact. And what the challenging fact is that the consumption of wheat in general has actually led to enormous health complications for millions and millions of people, whether they have diabetes, whether they have celiac disease, okay, or you could actually have neither of those diseases. The consumption of wheat can be very, very problematic. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, if you don't have celiac disease, you shouldn't eat wheat. But I just want to basically encourage you to learn more about the impact of wheat on your digestive system, on your diabetes, and ultimately on your actual health itself. All right? Now, other food sources that gluten is present in is malt in various forms. So this includes malted barley flour, malted milk or milkshakes, malt extract, malt syrup, malt flavoring. Anytime you hear the term malt, that contains gluten. Brewer's yeast also contains gluten and wheat starch, okay? And oats. Now here's the hard part. Oats are grown and processed near wheat. This is what, so we're going to start to really get into this and understanding the potential for contamination. So if you like oats in and of themselves do not have the protein gluten, but almost all oats are processed in facilities near wheat, and contamination basically easily occurs. So if you are looking for oats, or you want to eat oats, make sure that they say gluten-free. All right? Now, the bottom line is many, many foods contain gluten or are contaminated by gluten. We just read you kind of the highlight list. The key term really to learn is wheat, okay? And it's very, very important that you read food labels. And generally speaking, guys, reading food labels and educating yourself about nutrition labels and how food and nutrition labels are actually expressed and what they mean is extremely important to actually taking back control of the knowledge and the actual things that are going into your body. So I'll give you just a couple highlight guidelines. Anytime you are reading a food label, understand that the first ingredient that's listed in the food label is the ingredient that actually is the most in that product. Okay? So if wheat is the first ingredient in the product that you're consuming, that is actually telling you that there's more wheat in this product than any other ingredient. That's something that's very important to understand. The second thing when it comes to diabetes in particular is do not make the mistake of misunderstanding the differentiation between carbohydrate and sugar. So in almost all nutrition labels, you will see carbohydrate and you will see sugar listed as two different actual items. And do not make the mistake of seeing a small amount of sugar and thinking that the food is not going to have an impact on your diabetes. And I'll give you one example. I had some crackers the other day. I looked at the food label and it said, it had the term sugar and it said 0, but then it had the term carbohydrate and it said 25 grams. So that is a really classic example of, if you don't know how to read food labels and you don't really know what the actual meaning of the food labels are, you could be really susceptible to an unpleasant surprise, because 25 grams of carbohydrate will definitely cause a huge spike in your glucose levels. All right, now, so those are the guidelines for foods to avoid if you have celiac disease. Now, here's some other weird, and there are some great resources, so let me just share these with you. Okay, you want to be looking for the gluten-free label. That's the first thing to guide you. There's also a great website called Gluten-Free Watchdog, which basically will give you a whole list of foods that contain gluten, foods that you want to avoid. All right, now, here's the weird thing. Here's the weird thing that our team, when our team put the research together for this particular subject, I was surprised to learn this. And basically, gluten can also be found in envelopes. So if you have celiac disease, you actually need to be very careful and avoid licking envelopes. Gluten can be in cosmetic and beauty products. Gluten can be in toiletries, okay? It can be in vitamins. Vitamins and supplements are known to have gluten in them. There are medications that have gluten in them. And basically, cooking methods in restaurants many times basically cause cross-contamination of food with gluten. So whether that's in the frying pan or in pots or baskets on the oven or the grill, where gluten foods leave a residue and that contaminates the non-gluten food. So one thing that you really have to do, and this can be very challenging, is communicate. If you're eating out, you need to find restaurants that basically understand this issue, and you need to communicate to your server or to the restaurant where you're at that, look, you know, I really need to make sure that the food not only does not have gluten, but the preparation of the food is not cross-contaminated with gluten products. All right. So I just gave you a lot of don'ts. I just gave you a lot of things that basically you want to avoid. So let's talk now, guys, about things that you can eat. And this is where I want to really be encouraging, because all non-processed food, all non-processed food intake of fruits, vegetables, plant or animal protein, okay, that are in non-wheat carbohydrates, right? For A, number one, that is a gluten-free diet, and B, and this is what I really like about what our team put together, is that the consumption of non-processed fruits, vegetables, animal and plant protein is totally the best diet for everybody. Whether you have diabetes or you don't, whether you have celiac disease and you don't, or whether you have diabetes and celiac disease. Generally speaking, okay, a diet that consists of non-processed fruits, vegetables, animal protein, and vegetable protein is totally the healthiest option for you. And you will see that basically the core component of every single diet plan you've ever heard of, weight loss plan you've ever heard of, regeneration plan you've ever heard of, it basically comes down to that simple formula of portion control and the consumption of non-processed fruits, vegetables, animal protein and vegetable protein. And that's really, guys, what we want to be ultimately communicating today, is that if you have celiac disease, if you have a gluten allergy, okay, yes, you have to be careful. And their wheat is in a lot of different products, okay? And if you don't have, let's just be very clear. So if you don't have celiac disease, it is okay for you to consume wheat. But what I want to encourage you is to be very, very cautious and make sure that you are monitoring your portion of wheat consumption, you know. And unfortunately, in our country, we tend to, and really around the world, there tends to be an overconsumption of wheat. And, you know, for me personally, I don't necessarily follow any particular strict diet. I do green juicing every morning, and you guys have heard me talk about that, and, you know, I've espoused the benefits of that. The other thing that I'm really careful with is I am very careful to limit my bread intake. And my kind of general way of eating is, if I am consuming bread, I'm very, very careful to not consume more than one slice of bread. Or, you know, definitely, if I have a sandwich, I'm very, very conscious of the quality of the bread that I'm having. And quite frankly, I actually avoid eating sandwiches these days, because bread and me really just don't get along when it comes to my diabetes and also how I feel. And I don't have celiac disease, okay? But generally speaking, I'm very cautious of bread consumption. All right, now, why is this so important? Well, first off, celiac disease and diabetes is being recognized more and more as a comorbidity condition. And this whole talk, guys, is part of a series of really breaking down and explaining common comorbidity conditions with diabetes. There's another piece here, and the other piece is many people go undiagnosed. So they have an undiagnosed celiac disease or an undiagnosed allergy to gluten. And there are long-term health effects and conditions that can result in undiagnosed celiac disease. And some of those conditions are iron deficiency, early onset of osteoporosis, okay, and osteopenia, infertility and miscarriage, lactose intolerance, vitamin and mineral deficiency, central and peripheral nervous system disorders. I mean, this is really serious stuff, guys, that can be the result of undiagnosed celiac disease. Pancreatic insufficiency, intestinal lymphomas, and other GI cancers can be associated with undiagnosed celiac disease. Gallbladder malfunction, and neurological manifestations such as ataxia, epileptic seizures, migraines. So, you know, these are really things, guys, that can have a negative impact on your health. If you are experiencing those symptoms, and we went through a long list of symptoms, if you are experiencing those symptoms, you really should talk with your healthcare provider about celiac disease. But here's what the most important thing of this talk. If you suspect that you may have celiac disease or you may have a gluten allergy, do not avoid gluten before your endoscopy. Let me repeat that again. If you suspect that you have celiac disease or an allergy to gluten, do not avoid gluten before your actual endoscopy, because the intestinal wall needs to be exposed to gluten in order to exhibit the changes that are actually used to diagnose celiac disease. And that's a very, very important thing to understand, all right? Okay. This is such an interesting topic, guys. Generally speaking, when we really break down these autoimmune conditions, we tend to really explore interesting things, and I want to encourage you, utilize things like Google to educate yourself. Now, let me go ahead and stop right now. We've got a ton of people that have joined us. I want to do a huge shout out to Erica, okay? Erica's joined us on Instagram. Butch Quick is with us on Instagram. Sue722 and Kelly S0704 has joined us on Instagram, and it's great to have you here. Marisol and Maria have joined us on Facebook, okay? And we have got a ton of people joining us from around the world on YouTube and in the GlucoseZone app. I want to do a big shout out to Veronica and a big shout out to Glenda, who's a new member here. It is great to have you guys in the GlucoseZone. And I want to give you now the opportunity to answer questions, okay? We've covered a lot in these last couple diabetes talks. The last diabetes talk that we had, we talked about the relationship between asthma, allergies, and diabetes, and how the consumption of medications for asthma or allergies can actually have an impact on your glucose levels, which generally speaking, guys, is true for a lot of different medications. So especially medications that are related to depression and anxiety, okay, those are things you have to be very, very careful for when it comes to impacting your diabetes. All right? Okay, now, another thing, guys, that I want to share with you is something that's come up with me personally lately is I have to avoid what I call revenge diabetes management, okay? And what what revenge diabetes management is you start making bad decisions about managing your diabetes because you're frustrated with what's going on with your diabetes. And I did that the other day. I woke up and had really high blood sugar. I was really frustrated with that, and I basically reacted to that high blood sugar level, and I gave myself way too much insulin. And I ended up then basically experiencing an extended period of very frustrating and aggravating diabetes management all through the morning. And when I reflected on it, I was in an emotional state where I felt frustrated. I felt like I wanted to take revenge on diabetes. I wanted to address the issue immediately, okay? And generally speaking, I felt frustrated. So I'm sharing this with you for two reasons. Number one, anytime your glucose levels are higher than you want or lower than you want to be careful to not overreact. And that's much easier said than done, but usually what happens is when you overreact, you start getting on a roller coaster effect. And if your blood sugar was higher than you want, you overreact, and now it's lower than you want, or vice versa. If it's low, you overreact, you eat too much, and it spikes way higher, okay? And I just want to encourage you that, number one, guys, everybody goes through this, okay? Everybody that is living with diabetes suffers the frustration of imperfect tools, medications that, for the most part, do not actually address the core causes of your issues. They are prophylactic solutions at best, and they require constant management. And ultimately, that can be totally exhausting if you are not emotionally and mentally in the right place. And I was reminded of that because I shared what I went through basically a couple mornings ago with a friend who doesn't have diabetes, and basically his comment to me was, "That sounds exhausting." And you know what? That was a totally legitimate, and I actually appreciated that commentary because guess what? It is exhausting, okay? And it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of mental and emotional health to manage diabetes because diabetes doesn't it doesn't play fair. It doesn't do what it's supposed to do. The medications, for the most part, do not actually address the cause, the root issue of the high blood sugar levels, and they really, really take a lot of management. All right? And on that note, guys, you know what? We're going to sign off today. Diabetes and celiac disease are something that's becoming more and more common. They're, in the case of type 1 diabetes, they are both autoimmune issues. And what I want to encourage you is if you are suffering from both diabetes and celiac disease, acknowledge it for what it is. That is a challenging situation. But then start to actually identify the foods that you can eat, the foods that you can enjoy, and then really, really, guys, get committed to a positive relationship with those foods and a positive relationship with fitness. And if you do those things, you're going to find the joy, you're going to find the happiness of a healthy fitness lifestyle. All right? And we're going to see you guys in the GlucoseZone. And on that note, we're going to sign off. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I cannot wait to see you guys in the GlucoseZone.